let's move on to the Dallas Mavericks,
All
another
right.
team that had a interesting offseason, a lot of changes. They signed. We should talk about their success first. They made the Western Conference Finals. Um, it was a
Yeah.
it was actually a
Surprise.
pretty competitive. Was it a 5 or 6 game series with the Warriors?
It was only
Um,
five, but
yeah,
they had some moments. They got blown out in game one, and then the series got a lot more competitive after that.
yeah, yeah. They certainly looked good at points in the series. Just I think inexperience and also, let's be honest, major talent deficit if you look at them
Yeah.
compared to the Warriors. But over the offseason, they added JaVale McGee, they traded for Christian Wood, and they drafted Jaden Hardy. As far as who was headed out, obviously Jalen Brunson, who was a major part of their postseason success last year, is now a Knick. And they also had a few other pieces: Trey Burke, Marquise Chris, Sterling Brown, who are no longer there. Oh, and one other thing I should mention is Maxi Kleber, 3 year, 33 million extension. So he'll be a Mav probably until he retires.
Yeah. Maxi. I mean, that's a that's a solid signing for them. He's been a huge part of what they do, especially on the defensive end. Being a guy, he can hit some outside shots, but primarily, like, a lot of people don't really understand why Dallas was the sixth ranked defense in the NBA last year. No one was looking at
Mm-hmm.
Dallas and thinking that's an obvious defensively geared personnel. And I think it's just because people don't understand how good Maxi Kleber is, and to another
Mm-hmm.
extent, like how good Dorian Finney-Smith has gotten.
Oh yeah.
Like, and so they have these two sneaky, in my opinion, like all defensive team level forwards that they were able to build some super good defensive lineups out of, despite the fact that they were kind of otherwise tilting towards offense at a lot of their positions. They wanted a lot of guard creation. Like, for whatever reason in Dallas, guard offensive creation next to Luka Doncic has been the thing that's worked. It's been such a curious thing. Like, you think you'd want sort of a 3-and-D guy next to him, or sort of like a defensive utility piece, but it's like, no, Luka for some reason thrives next to another, like, a decisive attacking guard, which is what Jalen Brunson
Yeah.
was, which is what not Dorian Finney-Smith, but Spencer Dinwiddie
Who's still
is.
there? Yeah.
Yeah. And like you said, they drafted Jaden Hardy, which I think is, if he's a player that's going to pan out at all, I think that's a fantastic flyer to take on a big time talent that I think they got him in the second round or something.
Yeah, number 35 overall. And he was coming into the year, he was projected to be a top 5 pick. And,
Yeah.
he was in the G League. He really struggled with his consistency in offense. He really struggled with everything on defense. And I think he looked kind of small. And I think a lot of GMs saw that, him playing against at least semi NBA talent, and were scared off. But he certainly was a very highly regarded high school player.
Yeah, and I know, even beyond the sort of like hype of his high school position, I know of like a couple, you know, draft analysts that I really expect were very, very high on Jaden Hardy. I was not a fan, but like, again, sort of what I said in our last episode, there's like certain player types that I'm prejudiced against, and I never get excited about a scoring guard in the draft. Just like, oh, it always
Yeah.
feels like there's like 10 of them in every draft, and it's like, for me, it's always hard to evaluate what pops. But I'll always remember, like, a smart, I think it was Adam Spinella, who has a podcast, I think, called The Box and One, and he runs a YouTube channel, and he was really high on Jaden Hardy all year. So seeing, like, when you see a player like that, and that they've landed in a situation where it is the right fit, and where
Mm-hmm.
what they bring to the table is something that team wants, and Dallas absolutely loves to put attacking guards next to Luka Doncic, I'm definitely going to be, uh, you know, watching to see if he can get in on that rotation to some extent, because Tim Hardaway Jr. is coming back. Spencer Dinwiddie is already there, so it's not like He's not going to be starting. We don't know if he's going to be playing minutes right away, but I think it's something to watch with that kind of peculiar makeup of how Dallas likes to configure themselves around Luka Doncic.
The one thing I'm a little worried about with Jaden Hardy, and I like the idea of Jaden Hardy a lot, totally worth a second round pick. And I think they signed him to a 4-year deal as well. So they're invested in trying to make this work. But Dallas had a very similar scenario 3 years ago. Coming out of the draft, there was Stanford's point guard Tyrell Terry that a
Yeah.
lot of draft nicks were super high on because he had such an elite outside shooting ability and very quick release. A little bit Curry like, just in his.
For some reason, I thought you were going to go all the way back to Roddy Beaubois. I was just
Oh
like,
no,
he's not going to bring up Roddy buckets right now. Anyway, sorry, go
a
on.
little more recent than that.
Yes, definitely.
He had some Curry comparisons, just not the overall game, just in terms of like, oh, really fast release, can shoot from
Yeah,
deep,
yeah, I
can
remember.
stroke it. And Dallas picked him up, and a lot of people loved it and were like, steal of the draft. I think it was early second round as well. And Tyrell Terry's no longer in the league 2 years
Yeah,
later. So we'll see. I don't know how much that speaks to Dallas's development program, but let's hope things go better for Jaden Hardy. But one player that we should probably talk about is their major move of the offseason was trading for Christian Wood.
Christian Wood. Yeah, I think it was you that I remember talking about Christian Wood. You are a little bit higher on his defense, I think, than most people I've heard of. You like his mobility. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I'm just a believer in the potential of long, fluid athletes, especially in a system like Dallas's, because they have a couple of those that they've developed into really good defenders, like Dorian Finney-Smith. Reggie Bullock, I guess, was maybe more Tom Thibodeau creation, but he certainly has been really good defensively on the Mavericks as well. But
Yeah, had some big moments in the playoffs defensively.
yeah, and we'll be honest, we haven't seen it with Christian Wood yet. He's been on, a terrible Pelicans team, a terrible Detroit team, a terrible Rockets team. Like, he hasn't had a reason to really give his all defensively yet at this point in his career. But I'm a big player. I'm a big believer on players that have the defensive tools. It's there, and they're later in their career. They've had some opportunity to be a scorer, pile up some individual stats, maybe get a contract, and now they're on a team that could really contend. We've seen a lot of guys like that develop quite a bit defensively, even over a short period of time.
Yeah, I agree. I'm very excited to watch him in a pick and roll with Luka Doncic. I was really excited for him to play with James Harden when he got traded to the Rockets or when he signed with the
Yeah.
Rockets. I think that he has a very prototypical perfect skill set to sort of play out of the high post, set screens, run dribble handoffs, face up, like just kind of be that total offensive package on that end. So I'm very curious to see that. I was like a little bit surprised, but maybe not as surprised as some to hear the news that he may not be starting to start the season. That JaVale McGee will be the starting center, and they'll be bringing Christian Wood off the bench.
And for one, I don't think JaVale McGee is going to play heavy minutes.
No,
This is a
he's going to
guy
be
who
15
really,
minutes a game.
yeah, 15, 18 minutes a game. JaVale McGee really thrives in having those short bursts where he can come out and just, go nuts, set hard screens, roll to the rim hard. And he can't sustain that for very long. So I also don't necessarily think that Christian Wood is going to be playing the 5 maybe as much as it might initially seem. Like, he's a tall dude, but he's very lanky.
Yeah.
And he certainly has the athleticism to play the 4 offensively. And I think it's probably where he's better suited defensively as well. So
So
I think we'll see a lot of him sharing the floor with maybe Kleber at the 5 or another a rim roll running big, and him being out there for like the catch and the dribble drive off of Luka.
what do you think their starting lineup will be?
Yeah, so I mean, early on, it's been I think it's been Luka, Dinwiddie, Dorian Finney-Smith, JaVale. I'm not positive who that 5th guy is going to be. Certainly Reggie Bullock seems like an enticing option.
Yeah.
as a guy who can defend guards and forwards and space the floor.
Yeah.
He hasn't currently been starting in Mavs training camp, but it seems like the obvious move in the
Yeah.
future.
Could be. I mean, Bullock's an option. Tim Hardaway Jr. is an option if they want to go small on the perimeter, starting big with Wood or Kleber or Dwight Powell. Those are all options. It's kind of like they're going to have a good rotation, but it's not clear to me who's going to start. I mean, I assumed Wood was going to start, whether it was at the 4 or the 5, just sort of like if they're committed playing Dorian Finney-Smith at the 4 and JaVale's at the 5, that means they're going to do something else with their wing rotation. So it's definitely like I'll be very curious to see how that how their rotation breaks down after a couple of real regular season games.
I mean, Dorian Finney-Smith's so good defensively, you can't not start him. Like
He's
he
starting.
has,
It's more just a question of whether they put him at the 3 or the 4. It's more or
yeah.
like, I don't really care about that. Just who do they put next to him? Is it another wing or a guard or a bigger or a larger player?
The Mavs are another one of those positionless teams. I don't know how much they necessarily care. I mean, they'll
Yeah, I
play
mean they're
five forwards at once. They'll put two bigs on the floor at once. Like,
and
this
their
is kind of
point
what they
guard
do.
is 6'7" and 250 pounds. So
Yeah.
that already
Well,
kind of like changes some things you do.
yeah, yeah, that's absolutely true.
I didn't say 250 pounds to make fun of him last year. Like I think like he was like 270 pounds, like 270 last year. So I think like
Oh
Luka at
yeah,
a healthy playing weight is still like probably 240. He's just got those tree trunk legs and stuff. So he's a heavy boy.
yeah, and he leverages his size to be effective on the court. So in
Definitely.
his case, as long as he can have enough juice to play a whole game and still be effective down the stretch,
Yeah.
that I think that's the level of conditioning he just needs to be at. So my question for you
Mm-hmm.
is: they got Luka, they got Dinwiddie. Early indications that we'll start at once. Like, do you think the Mavs need a third playmaker, and is it on their roster, or is a trade in the cards here?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think for so long people were looking for that second star to put next to Luka, right? That's like I feel like every Mavs conversation was dominated by like how are they going to put another star next to Luka? Especially once the Porzingis trade did not immediately bear fruit and continued to not bear fruit. But I think now we're seeing them more settle into this identity of where they sort of know what works around Luka, and that's kind of having the right ingredients, making sure that they're shooting, making sure that there's tons of defense on the floor, making sure that there's like other guys who can handle a rock, and making sure that he's got has some rim diving options. Like they brought in JaVale McGee and they still have Dwight Powell. I look at the roster and like after Dinwiddie, I just see there's some other guys who I think totally qualify as like tertiary playmakers, whether that means it's like Tim Hardaway, who just loves to like jack shots. Like he's a really aggressive scorer, even if he's not like a playmaker. We already talked about Jaden Hardy. And I think
Josh
that
Green?
Josh Green, I mean, he's a nice passer.
Yeah,
I like watching Josh Green. He's one of those guys that, unless he learns how to shoot, there's definitely a cap on how effective he can be on offense. And he's one of those guys that seems to be allergic to shooting the basketball, not even just like shooting outside shots. I mean, like he doesn't look like he likes to
yeah.
score at all. Like he's
He
always
won't
trying to
take
set guys up.
Yeah, he won't take the shot unless he's wide open. And when he
Yeah,
is, I mean, they go in occasionally. I don't know.
yeah.
I don't see his jump shot as like hopeless, but yeah, he's
No,
reluctant to shoot.
I mean if sometimes with players like that, coaches get them to be more aggressive and really sell them and put them in a scoring role. Like I mean, I remember on the Mavericks like that happening with a very like a young Steve Nash, Don Nelson being like, dude, you can't just pass all the time. We need you to leverage your scoring threat to reach our ceiling on offense. So if that can happen with Josh Green and he can just become like like a guy that averages a little bit better than 5 points per game sort of thing on like the 3 shots or whatever he takes. I think that's in the
Yeah.
cards, but I look at Christian Wood as being someone who can potentially be that extra playmaker. Like I think he has all the tools to be a complete offensive player there in the front court. Like he sometimes like kind of reminds me a little bit of like a poor man's like modern version of Tim Duncan with the way he just sort of was like B plus at all the kind of like offensive big man skills. I'm not like
On
comparing him to
offense.
on
On
offense
offense, maybe
specifically,
there's a shade
absolutely.
of that. Yeah.
Just talking about the offensive game where he can operate at the high post, low post. He's got a little bit of stretch to him, and kind of like can make solid reads. So I'm very
Yeah.
curious to see if he can grow into that role.
Yeah, and he's overlooked as the playmaker on this team because he's not a guard. But you're right. Like Christian Wood can do stuff catching the ball with it in his hands, facing up a defender. Like he can make things happen.
Definitely. My question for you is just can the Mavs win enough games for Luka to win MVP? Because I feel like the league is waiting for him to win enough games to qualify for the MVP award.
Yes.
All right.
I'm gonna go with that. I guess I can clarify my answer a little bit. I for a long time was in that camp, and maybe still am. I mean, I think the Mavs would love to have a second star alongside Luka, right?
Yeah.
But I also think we saw in the playoffs that they have defense and shooting for days surrounding a guy who is just an inferno offensively and can, makes make anything he want to happen to a defense happen. Just bully smaller defenders, get past large defenders and finish over the top of them or step back threes in their face. And you surround a heliocentric star like that with enough shooting, and it can be an elite offense. And we saw against the Suns, the shots went in, and the Mavs won that series. And the Warriors, the shots didn't. And one thing that I think needs to be said is the Mavs got a whole lot of open shots in that Warriors series that did not drop. And as bad as it looks, losing in 5 games and looking overmatched for at least a couple of games there that series, like there is a world in which the Mavs win that series if they shoot 40% on wide open threes instead of like 31% or whatever they shot. They got a lot of looks and they didn't drop. And I mean, that's the struggle with role players in the playoffs. Stars can struggle too, but like role players, why people don't like relying on role players in the playoffs, I think, is just because the consistency. That's the difference between a good and a great player in the NBA is consistency. And a lot of times with role players, consistency isn't there. But am I as worried about that in the regular season? Like, no, I think the Mavs are going to be awesome. I mean, I think they're going to be in the mid 50s in wins this year, providing everyone stays healthy.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the Mavericks have sort of figured out their identity, and we didn't like. It's funny that we didn't even like bring up Jalen Brunson, who the big
Yeah.
departure from that team. But it's just kind of like I think that they figured out the right players to put around Luka, and they can find guys to play those roles, and they're going to be competitive as long as they can do that.
Yeah. I mean, is Jalen Brunson a really good player? Yes.
Yeah.
Was he perhaps rated a little bit higher than he actually is in reality because he had one awesome, incredible series, not trying to take away from him against the Utah Jazz, who are one of the worst perimeter defenses we've ever seen. Also, yes, Jalen Brunson's good. They're going to miss him. I think Christian Wood can replace his production offensively.
Yeah, I agree. I like Jalen Brunson a lot and enjoyed his playoff success there, and I really like his game. But I'm not really worried about that one either.